Hello, and welcome to another Mr. Munner's English video. This is a series of videos exploring the Year 12 VCE English exam. Today we're going to be discussing Section A, focusing on Stephen Maxwell Johnson's text, High Ground. Today we're going to be looking at a bit of an overview. There are other videos that I've made that look at essay structure, body paragraph and introduction, that look at unpacking prompts, and that analyse and look at how we can explore film devices. So let me just share my screen. Cool. So what we wanted to start by doing today is we just want to have a look at the expected qualities for high-scoring essays. And what we want to ensure is that we're meeting these qualities and that we're able to practice and able to develop our skills to make sure that we're actually targeting specific areas that are defined within these areas. And we can summarize these the descriptors into what I call the fundamentals, and that's really just a summary of the points that are being made by VCA in the study design. So essentially, we want to be looking at building a close and perceptive understanding of the text, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Really, just narrowing down to what makes the text tick and how we can actually develop our own point of view for the text. Second is unpacking the prompt to establish an effective response. And we want to be able to do that in a really efficient, effective way. And there are other videos that you'll be able to see at the end of this video. Thirdly, we want to be analysing film devices. We use camels in my class, but there are other avenues for actually analysing film devices. And camels is really just a really good mnemonic device, an acronym to help you remember the different aspects and the different film devices. Lastly, we want to be developing a controlled, well-structured response using whatever essay writing template that you use or structure that you use, just to make sure that you're writing really coherently and really structured to make sure that your responses are effectively expressed. And then lastly, number 5 is employing effective expression to facilitate an effective response. So let's start with textual knowledge. We need to make sure that we're understanding the context that underlie the text. We need to make sure that we're demonstrating a sophisticated knowledge of the text. And thirdly, we need to demonstrate a personal interpretation of the text. And I've highlighted in that bold because it's really important that you do this. One of the things that students often miss out is in this personal interpretation. And the problem is that their essays don't really have a point of view. They're just reciting facts, they're just reciting quotes, they're just analysing some film devices, but you don't really demonstrate a personal interpretation. You don't actually illustrate that you have a connection to the text. So my recommendation is that you do watch this film multiple times, 4, 5, 6 times, to just become extraordinarily familiar with it. Unpacking the prompt. Now, there's further detail in my Unpacking the Prompt video, but really we want to be looking at developing a consistent approach in around 5 minutes, because that's really how long you get in your exam, that fleshes out the key concepts and ideas of the prompt and what it's asking you to do. Now, each prompt is unique. Each prompt has an individual interpretation that you can draw from it. Not every single person needs to be addressing the prompt in the same way. And you need to be very clear when you're unpacking it exactly what the prompt looks like to you. Thirdly, you must plan your essay with a clear, deliberate point of view. You must be saying, this is what I want to say in my essay. It's very important that when you unpack the prompt, you bear that in mind as you explore some of those ideas. We want to be analysing film devices. You must analyse film devices throughout your essay, and I'd recommend that you have analysis of film devices in every single body paragraph. Your analysis must support your discussion of the prompt, so not any random film device analysis that's just kind of chucked in there because you need to do it. It actually has to support your discussion and should contribute to the point of view that you're trying to express. So each body paragraph should analyze a film device, no repetition of film devices, so no camera angle that you're constantly referring back to. Your analyst should develop and flesh out your interpretation. goes without saying. And lastly, your analysis of film devices must be supplemented by quotes in every body paragraph. And that is quotes that are analysed alongside quotes that are embedded throughout. And this is a vital component of your essay, a vital component of the analysis and of the evidence that you're using to support your discussion. We also want to include making sure we're focusing on structure. So again, there's a video that is about essay structure that looks at body paragraphs, that looks at introductions. I recommend that if you need to have a look at those, please do so. But when we are looking at structure, the things we need to focus on in our revision is making sure that our response is developed throughout our piece and that it is facilitated through the structure of our essay. We need to ensure that our topic sentences are clear, concise, and focused. These must be a central part of your practice. And you can even just take a whole lot of different practice essay topics and just develop topic sentences from them. Just do the fleshing out of the prompt, unpacking the prompt, and then just write topic sentences, because it can be a really great way for you to develop concise, structured ideas that you can go and write body paragraphs if you need to. And lastly, you should be using the what and the how and the why to develop your discussion. Whether you use Teal or whether you use another format, it's totally up to you, but you really need to have that what is the author saying, or what is, in this case, Stephen Maxwell Johnson saying, how is Stephen Maxwell Johnson saying it, so through what devices, through what techniques, through what quotes, and lastly, why is he saying it in this way? What is it enabling him to comment in a holistic way? And then, of course, last but not least, there's not a video on this, but this is expression, really important. And when we circle back to our expected qualities, expression down the bottom there develops a cogent, controlled, and well-substantiated discussion using precise and expressive language. Obviously, using precise and expressive language is an important component. It's going to enable you to write fluently and to write an impressive piece of writing. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we're keeping our expression clear and simple, but your idea is sophisticated. A lot of the time I see students who are really just trying to write really sophisticated writing as opposed to having sophisticated ideas. And they use what I like to call thesaurus words. That's just words that just sound really sophisticated, but ultimately they're just words. It's just fluff. And really you want your ideas to shine, not the actual language that you're using. Your language should be as clear and simple to enable your ideas to flourish. Employ accurate use of character and place names. So whether it's Gutjuk, whether it's Travis, whether it's Nimbara Rock, whatever the name is, make sure that you've accurately used it, both in spelling and in terms of the actual person or place name. Employ meta language in an effective way. So if you're using a motif, make sure it is a motif. If you're using a particular reference to mise en scène and you say the word mise en scène, make sure your reference is mise en scène. Sounds obvious, but it's really important that you have the use of meta language, the use of that specific language to English in a very precise way. So let's provide a little bit of an overview of the text. So what exactly is this text about? Now, I've included a quote here. You know how civilization's built, son? Bad men doing bad things, clearing the way for others to follow. Bad men like you, me, and you. So it could be seen as a celebration of Yolngu culture and its people. Despite the efforts of bad men like Moran, Yolngu culture has persisted. Does that mean that the efforts of Dapa, Gutjuk, Gawiri, and Bewara have been successful? Because we're now exploring, we're now celebrating their culture, we're celebrating their existence in the past, their existence in the present. So is the very, very fact that there's been a film made about these people 100 years after the massacre and after these events have happened is an evidence of the fact that Dapa, Gutjuk, Gilwiri, and Bewara's efforts have actually been successful. And is that the part of the commentary that's being made by Maxwell Johnson? Additionally, could Maxwell Johnson be posing the question of who the bad men are? And are they not just bad men in the past, but also bad men in the present? Are we the others to follow, walking in the footsteps of oppressive colonizers who cleared the way for us? In that case, we're essentially the followers of the bad men like Moran, the bad men like Travis, who have actually committed these atrocities and have actually enabled civilization to flourish. Or is the continued oppression of Indigenous people, i.e., the rejection of the voice and the other ways that Indigenous people are oppressed today, is that evidence that the bad men are still paving the way, and it's up to the viewers to actually stand up to those bad men, to actually, like Gutjuk, like Dapa, like Gilwiri and Bewara, to stand up and actually say, no, we're not going to stand for this. So I guess that's two ways that we can look at what the text serves to do and its essential purpose. Could the text be acknowledged as a twist in the classic Western? We've discussed this before. So we could view High Ground as a play on common Western tropes. Indeed, the positioning of Travis as the white saviour and Gutjuk's inability to truly taste freedom hints at this fact. And we see a lot of references to Western films in how the characters dress, how they act, how they position, how the power dynamics are actually twisted by Maxwell Johnson. Could this be exposing the horrific reality of colonialism? High Ground is uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable film. We see gross violence. We see oppression. We see racism. We see words that we don't commonly hear in today's and are very much frowned upon. So, in presenting the horrific reality of colonialism, is it presenting a history that has seldom been highlighted in popular media, and that's the purpose that it's served to highlight, and that is the purpose of the film, to actually showcase that this has happened, this is part of our history, and as Australians, we need to confront it. So it's important that we're actually looking at evidence. One of the key things that I would recommend that you do is have a look at those key pieces of evidence that you are using in your essays. And I would recommend that you call them what you want. I've got the big 13 because it is those 13 pieces of evidence that I just have so well ingrained into my brain that I know exactly what I'm going to say about them, how I'm going to use them. And I've just got so many different ways that I can use them. So I would recommend that you develop your own list like this of those key quotes. Now, maybe you don't include quotes like bad men because you probably already should have that quote in your brain, but just quotes that you're kind of just bringing in and just have, as you're viewing these films again, as you should be, just take note of those key quotes and just develop a list. You can use my list if you want, that's fine, but making your own list can make it more, enable you to actually take ownership. So let's go through some examples. So this stone, this is the spearhead. It is the rule of law. It cannot be outdone. Hardest stone there is. So this is said by Dapa. Dapa says this when he's discussing violence. He's discussing Gutjuk's next action and what he intends to take. They're discussing the notion of violence and how violence is entrenched within life. So it says here, it is the rule of law. So essentially, the stone, the spearhead, war, violence, it is part of the world. It is part of the land. It is part of who human beings are, essentially. And essentially, he's saying that once you choose violence, you can't go back. You can't choose to and undo the perpetuation of violence. So he's speaking to this idea of this cycle of violence that's being perpetuated by both settlers and by Nyolngu people. And I think that Dapa in this instance is saying, think about peace. Think about the ways that you can do this in a more passive way in order to protect your people. Because your role as a leader is essentially to protect your people. And the question he's asking is, by using the spearhead, by using violence, are you actually stopping the violence from that cycle? Are you enabling yourself to protect your people? Because the reality is, if you choose violence, that violence continues, that cycle continues, and you're just putting yourself and your people in danger. So in this case, we can use the stone, we can use the spearhead, we can use this quote as an example of, as a symbol. It's a symbol of violence. It's a symbol of that cycle of oppression, that cycle of violence, that cycle of the violence that's occurred for both, and is perpetuated by both the Aboriginal people and also the settlers. Next quote: "Your anger is all you have," and then followed up by, "I know how it feels to be beaten, to feel like nothing." So this is an instance where we see that inside of the cave. And we have a stark contrast between looking out, looking into the open, looking into freedom. So they're talking about peace, they're talking about passivity, and taking the direction of peace leads them to freedom. Whereas we talk about anger, and Gilwiri's been trapped by her anger. She's trapped by being beaten. She's trapped by being made to feel like nothing. So her choice is vengeance. She doesn't have a choice because she's been repeatedly beaten, repeatedly smacked down. It is a choice that she doesn't have. And as a consequence, the camera is looking into the cave. So that fire, that symbolic fire, that metaphorical anger that is present within this scene, and like the lighting, okay, if we want to look at lighting as a film device, here their character, their faces, the scene is lit by that fire. It's lit by that anger. That anger is looking back into the claustrophobic cave, looking back into the darkness of the cave, looking back into these closed spaces where they can't be free, where they can't be liberated. So in this case, this contrast between these two scenes, that's why I've included them here. It shows how the director and how these quotes are actually being wielded by Maxwell Johnson in order to say certain things, that violence is the perpetuation of this cycle of violence and this cycle of anger. And I really like this quote. I really like this quote here. This country, my country, and it's DARPA talking about how this is his country, this is his land, this is his people, this is his. It's not just a land for him. It's not just a place. It's not just somewhere that he lives. This is who he is. This is his heritage, his culture, his spirituality. And he's willing to fight for it. And we can see this contrasted in the depiction of this scene. So obviously we have them on opposite sides of this shot. But if we look closer, we can see that all of the Yolngu people are carrying spears. They're carrying weapons. So even though they've come in peaceful, they've come to negotiate, they're coming to find justice, and it's justice in the form of peace. They're doing so peacefully, but also that this is their weapon. Their negotiation, their search for justice is being wielded as a weapon. And this is contrasted, like this is their war. This is their fight. Their fight is right here, negotiating and trying to find a sense of justice. Whereas for the settlers, Moran at the front there, none of them have got weapons. None of them are actually needing to fight here because they feel like they've already won. For them, it's not necessary to come fighting. It's not necessary to actually be prepared for battle. Whereas for the Indigenous people, they need to have those weapons because this is their fight. They're fighting for who they are. They're fighting for their identity. They're fighting for justice. They're fighting for their culture and spirituality. They're fighting for the essence of who they are. So for these Yolngu people, they're fighting for who they are. And that's why they need these weapons. And we can see that as the scene progresses. Moran is really just trying to just tell them, oh, this is how it is. As representatives of the king, we are here to share our wisdom and to share our justice and our laws with you. For them, it's not really about spirituality and about culture and about right and wrong. It's about we're here and there's nothing you can do about it. It's essentially what he says. So we see that Moran has used the word this when he's described the country. And that lacks the possessive of DARPA's my country, where he's actually taking ownership. He's saying, this is my country. Whereas we see Moran has kind of disconnected himself from the country. He doesn't really have that spiritual connection. DARPA is very, very, uh, very determined to make it clear that this is his country. He has that spiritual connection. He has that cultural connection. Of course, Moran lacks that. Let's move on to setting. So there's a stark contrast between Settler Place and Yongu Place, and we can really draw a separation between the places that are defined as settlers and the places that are defined as Yongu. Often we see open, beautiful, tranquil. The tranquility of the Yongu people suggest reflected in the places they inhabit, whether it's in the waterhole or whether it's in the beautiful cave or whether it's in any of the landscapes that are connected to the Yongu. Often there we do see that openness and we do see that beauty and that tranquility. Yes, they're wild. Yes, they are untamed, but there's a beauty about them. This is contrasted when we have a look at settler place. Often settler places are confined. Often they're enclosed. And there's a more sparse nature to them. There's a lack of beauty. We see large portions of land which are cleared by the settlers. So when we're talking about when we're talking about setting, we can really draw this distinction between the two places. And it reflects the empty, restricted nature of settler life and ideology, whereas the Yolngu indigenous places are often reflective of that kind of that freedom, reflective of that wild and that beautiful nature that they have, or at least they're depicted as having within the film. So if we have a look at the scenes which are on the screenshots which are on the screen here, we see that the closed church, all the individuals are organised in a very ordered manner, and really they're very restricted, not just by the ideology that they're being governed by, but also by the setting and by extension of the mise en scène. When we see the beautiful waterhole in the second image there, it's kind of the opposite of that. There's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more liberation. There's a lot more ability of the characters and of the actors within that scene to actually be free and to actually kind of express themselves. So we can see a stark contrast between how these scenes are put together, settler and and indigenous, and the way that they function for the characters and the way that they function to create meaning. Of course, Numbara Rock, which is that beautiful opening and closing. We have that landscape and the drone shot, which just sees it approach. Uh, in both cases, we see that wildness of nature. We see the wildness and the cyclical nature, both of the violence and both of the human persistence. And we see that cycle of grief that's kind of evident and present within the Nimbara Rock, that nature is ever present. It's always going to be there and it's always going to be returned to. There's nothing that these human pains and these human existence can do to stop that. So we see conflict in the opening act. And I want to include this because I think that the visceral bloody violence being right at the start and being contrasted, uh, and we see this oscillating within that first scene. We see uh, we see Gujuk and we see Bewara doing the kind of their very paternal training scene where they're talking about their culture and they're talking about the totem, they're talking about this spiritual connection. And we see this oscillation between that scene and then the hooves of the horses riding in at the start of the massacre. And we see the beauty of their culture, the beauty of their spirituality, contrast with the bloody nature of the conflict and the bloody nature of the massacre. And it's really quite confronting. I just wanted to talk about how those scenes function and why it happens at the start. So I think that, and it might be something that you want to think about, like why has Maxwell Johnson chosen to have this scene, chosen to have this oscillation between that cultural connection and then the destruction of the scene. And maybe it is to identify that Gutuk is our character, Gutuk is our protagonist. And really this is the beginning of his story. It's the beginning of his reconnection. It's the beginning of him having his identity stolen and then him being forced to reconnect with his people. It's really his journey. This is Gutuk's journey. And he's the one who has to search for the high ground. It's not Travis. Travis is arguably just a bit character, just someone to facilitate Gutuk's journey. So it's interesting to see how this opening scene with the massacre serves to reinforce that. I'd like to just highlight some key concepts, things like colonialism, so the establishment of a colony in a previous occupied land, things like patriarchy, which I'll know that not that evident. It's interesting to see that the majority of the characters within the film are actually male, and that the female characters often are present as just minor characters. The word dogma is a really great word. It's a principle or a set of principles laid down by an authority is yeah, conservatively true. Naturalized is regarded or caused to appear natural. Obviously, that is often used within an ideological sense. So certain concepts, certain ideas can be seen as being naturalized because they are seen as being true. Social construction is an idea or notion that appears to be natural and obvious to people who accept it, but may or may not represent reality. And it's interesting how social constructions exist within high ground. So when we have that scene where the meetings of the leader, Darper and Moran says, "I come here as a representative of the king, and I am laying down his law." Obviously, within that context, the social construct for him is that the king is the leader. The king's law is the law. You can't argue against that. So within that context, that social construction, the construction of the king being of reigning supreme, is social construction that is not necessarily followed by DARPA and followed by the indigenous people. Obviously, those social constructions exist within culture in different ways, and connections to kind of gender, to sexuality, to all facets of identity can be seen as being obvious to certain people and certain to cultures, but not to others. This relates to the idea of the status quo. So that is the established social norms, the current state of things within a particular situation or society. So obviously there are particular social norms that are evident within both Indigenous culture and within settler culture, and it is the overthrowing of that status quo that Gutjuk is attempting to kind of cause. And then obviously gender norm, cultural norm are things that are important for us as well. And lastly, privilege. So a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular group of people. So these are words that you might want to use in your essays, use in your writing. Yes, I said at the start, make sure that your expression is very clear, but if you have words that you know the meaning of and that you can use very skillfully, they can serve to just elevate your writing and elevate your ideas. One example is the use of post-colonial. So we've discussed the idea of post-colonial literature being literature that has been since the colonisation of Australia. And we asked the question of, can Australia ever truly be decolonised? Is colonisation something that is ongoing and persistent? And certainly post-colonial literature is literature that exists subsequent to colonisation, and it is shaped by a colonial past and through the ongoing relationship between coloniser and colonised. And you might want to think about how the fact Australia being colonised impacts the construction of high ground, and how the director being a white person, yes, he spoke to and did a lot of research in discussion and consultation with the local Indigenous people. But the question is, like, how does his history and how does his understanding of what is a fraction or what is a biased past, how does his understanding of those things impact his construction of the film? Okay, so power within high ground. So their allocation of power within high ground represents an interesting element of the overarching narrative. The question could be asked, is this a text about the relationship between Gutjuk and Travis, character study of Gutjuk, or an exploration of the subjugation and oppression of Aboriginal peoples during settlement? So when we look at character, what I've tried to do here is kind of just highlight the power dynamics and the relationships that are key within the film. So the first one that I want to look at is Travis and Gutjuk. Then I want to look at Moran and Darpa, and then Gutjuk on his own, how Gutjuk's power dynamics and relationship, his inner relationship, how it actually is defined, and then the same for Travis, and then lastly, Gilweri and Darpa. And primarily when we're looking at Gilweri and Darpa, we're looking at how their opposing ideals, their anger and negotiation, how they actually function to cause conflict, and uh, how they actually motivate and how they draw inner conflict with Gutjuk. When we look at Travis and Gutjuk, we could think that maybe the relationship and the power dynamics are centered on the idea of control and just power itself. But I think that when it comes to it, it's about morality. It's about making those moral decisions. With Moran, when we're looking at the conflict, the power dynamic between Moran and Darpa, it's about ideology. They both talk about justice, but their idea of justice comes from a different place. So really, their relationship and their power dynamic can be defined through ideology. So if we want to look at purely the relationship between Travis and Gutjuk, on the surface appears to be one defined by control, but ultimately is about morality. Travis is blinded by the need of maintaining the high ground, ignoring the guilt that comes with rejecting the metaphorical moral high ground. We see Travis's he's constantly oblivious to the needs of Gutjuk, with his assertion that having the high ground makes him able to make balanced decisions. However, it is not until too late that he recognises the unfortunate reality of his decisions, choosing redemption through sacrificing himself. So almost every action he takes with respect to Gutjuk is one that is incorrect. So when he takes Gutjuk out of the pond at the start during the massacre, he essentially condemns him to a life of being a settler or having to live with settlers, and he becomes almost an outcast with his own people because he's grown up as a settler and he has from the Yolngu people, he has a warped vision of who he is, and Gilweri says that. He says that you just pretend to be a white man. You're not a real Indigenous person. So I think that these actions that Travis thinks he's doing it for a good reason are actually condemning Gutjuk to a life that he doesn't need to live. If he hadn't have taken him, then he probably would have just been taken and grown up by his grandfather and grown up with his own people. So ultimately, the actions that Travis takes, although maybe with the best intentions, often is evident of him being blinded to the reality that is actually apparent. His actions condemn Gutjuk throughout the film, and we see this at the end. He says to Gutjuk, you need to have the high ground. Like, it's about control, it's about power. But ultimately, taking that high ground and having that power causes that cyclic violence. It causes him to most probably be hunted for the rest of his life. And we've spoken about this scene at the bottom here of the screenshot where Travis's gun is pointed at Gilwery and Kutchuk as they ride away. So it's evident of the fact that they're most likely going to be hunted and chased for the rest of their life. Okay. We talk about the relationship. We talk about the relationship between Kutchuk that he has with himself. So we would call this inner conflict. It's kind of that relationship as he's building his understanding of who he is. That's defined obviously by identity and by conflict. He's trying to find who he is. He's trying to find where he fits in the world, and he's trying to just determine how he can best protect his people. So the inner relationship Kutuk maintains with himself can be defined by conflict as he manages his own identity. We see this evident within the shot with Claire there. Claire's putting that hat onto Kutuk's head. In this instance, it's like he's kind of his last moment of being dressed as a settler. It's like, you're one of us. And yes, she speaks his language in this scene. And yes, she says, be safe, etc. Uh, in this instance, it's kind of representative of that inner conflict. He is an Indigenous man who's being brought up and is dressing as a settler, as a white person, and it really defines and really represents that inner conflict that is present within Kutchuk. We see that also within this cave scene. Cave scene here. In this cave scene, obviously uh, this is the scene where Gilwery and Darpa have these opposing conversations with Goodjook about his life and about the direction he's going to take. And Darpa implores him to take negotiation and take a peaceful option, whereas Gilwery is driven by anger and driven by the need to get vengeance on the settlers, on the white people, and implores Goodjook to take control of the situation through violence, through anger. Uh, so ultimately, Goodjook's character is defined by this search for identity and this search for his place within the world. And we see that in this moment with Claire, he feels a little bit lost. He needs protection by the sun because he's wearing a hat, but also from the dis from the disconnection he feels with his people and disconnection he feels with himself. So, last thing I just want to look at how we can use what I've called a theme triangle in order to develop ideas. So, this is the theme triangle. Obviously, in the three corners, we have our we have our three kind of major themes. We have identity, power, and conflict. In the middle, we have colonialism, which is really the central concept that the whole film hinges on. But we have how does colonialism interact and intersect with power, with conflict, with identity. And then we have groupings of themes in green there. So we have the idea of gender, morality, and hope, and justice, and dehumanization. And what this can enable us to do is identify those key themes and their relationship with some of the other key themes. And this can be really can really work well as a tool for practice because it can just help you to make those connections with different themes. So in the prompt that we've got here, explore the concepts of justice and revenge and the effects that they have on the communities involved. So here we have justice. Justice relates to the idea of dehumanization, maybe it relates to the abuse of power. So in this case, you could say that Miranda is wielding the notion of justice in order to dehumanize and abuse his own power, because he's saying that justice has been met through the killing and the rounding up of Indigenous people. So you could make the argument that the key to justice within a settler mindset is reinforcing their own power. Because if you are able to maintain the dogma, so the dogmatic ideals, if you are able to maintain the status quo, if you are able to control justice, then you're able to wield that power and you're able to actually maintain it. Maybe if we look at the idea of justice and how it relates to violence. So justice and the search for justice is often something that causes violence. So Gilwery and Bewara both, in their search for justice, they choose violence. And violence is something that is perpetuated through under the name of justice. You might want to look at the idea of revenge and how revenge maybe relates to the idea of freedom. So Gutjuk chooses revenge but loses his freedom, you could argue. If we go back to this screenshot here of the gun, he's chosen revenge, he's chosen violence, and the cost for him is that he loses his freedom. So in this instance, you might want to say, okay, I'm going to talk about how the cost of revenge is the loss of freedom. So my suggestion is that you take this slide, you take this theme triangle, you add more themes to it, and you just practice connecting different themes together and just talk about what do these themes actually say, how if you connect them together. If you connect the idea of revenge with hope, what does that say about the characters? What does that say about the film? Does it work? Okay. And that's all I've got for you. Hopefully you've been able to get something out of today's lesson, out of today's lecture. Please send me an email if you have any further questions and check in with some other videos. Thank you.